Welcome to the FL Studio 20 Complete Beginner's Guide. I'm Michael, and today I'm going to be showing you how to use this software from a beginner's perspective, simplifying the process and just making sure that you really understand the basics of the software so that you can start making music the way that you want to. I've been using FL Studio for a few years professionally, mixing music, producing, mastering music, and I'm also an FL Studio Power user, but I do remember what it was like beginning and just how complicated everything looked. Today I'm just going to be simplifying the whole process so that we can just start making music and stop worrying about the software so much. So let's just get straight into it. When you first open up FL Studio, it might look a little bit confusing, but don't worry, this is all going to make sense in just a few minutes. The first thing would be looking at the menus and these buttons up at the top. So you've got your file menus and your option menus. If you go into file menu, this is where you're going to be opening projects, saving projects, exporting your MP3s and WAV files, got your MIDI settings, audio settings, general settings, all of that stuff, so you can sort of configure things the way you want with your sound card, with your MIDI controller. I have videos showing how to set up the audio interfaces and MIDI controllers. I'll link all of that stuff in the description. If you move across the top bar, we have master volume and master pitch. It's best to just leave these exactly where they are. And we have the transport controls here. So you can either choose between your song or your pattern. I'll explain the difference in a minute. And you've got your play, pause, stop, and record, and your tempo. Now you can change the tempo by clicking and dragging, so left click and drag, or by typing in a value, or by just choosing a set value. Whenever you hover over something, there's a little guide at the top left that shows you what it is. It says this is a metronome, this is countdown before recording, this is typing keyboard to piano keyboard. These little options here are to do with recording and editing, and they'll make sense in no time at all. The next thing we're going to do is look over to here. Now this is the pattern selector. The way stuff works inside of FL Studio is that you build patterns and then you arrange these patterns into songs. So this is where we're going to go to choose our patterns later on. Then we have a really important section here, and these buttons control which windows we see inside FL Studio. So we have options to see playlists, piano rolls, channel racks, mixers, and I'm just going to explain what all of this is right now. So basically there's 5 main sections. We have at the side a browser here. This contains all the samples, instruments, and stuff on your computer. So this is where everything is stored. Then you have a channel rack, and this is where the samples and instruments that you've chosen for this project are stored. And this is where you create patterns. Then you have the playlist, which is this tab here. This is where you take those patterns and you arrange them and paint them and chop them up into a song. Then if we click up here, we can open the mixer. All of the audio is routed through the mixer and out through the master channel. And I'm going to go into all of this in detail, so don't worry that we're glossing over it. And then the 5th panel is the piano roll. And this is where you're going to be sequencing your chords and your melodies. So let's slow down and do that one step at a time. Once more through the signal flow, we have the browser, which contains everything. We select what we want and put it onto the channel rack. We build patterns, and then we arrange the patterns into a song, and then all of the information, all of the audio is sent through the mixer and then out to the master, and that's where your final song will be. So let's break this down really slowly and really easily. So starting with these buttons up here, this one here is the channel rack. And a really quick tip at the start would be to select this drop-down menu and make it detached at the bottom, and this means that it's not going to keep disappearing whenever I select the playlist. Otherwise it just disappears and you have to go press that button again. But at any time you can just press that button to open or close it. This channel rack is where all of the samples and instruments in our project exist. When you open up FL Studio, it loads with these 4 samples, kick through to a snare. You can add whatever you want to this. So if I go to the browser, which is on the side, and if it's not here, just drag out from the side. I'm going to go to packs. I'm going to go to drums, kicks, and you see there's so many samples here. There's kicks, there's percussion, there's sound effects, there's instruments, there's anything you want, but you can select what you want. And I'm going to take a kick. You can just click it, left click, and just drag straight onto the channel rack. And now it's within our project, and it's a sample that we can use in the project. If I go back to the browser, I can select an instrument, maybe I want a keyboard, and I can just drag a piano into our project. and you can see that it's been added to the channel rack. So this is where all the samples that we're using will exist. If we want to add a virtual instrument, we can also just click this button down here and add a VST like a synth, or we could add our own plugins. Going back to basics for a second, if I want to see what these samples actually are, we can left click on them and then you open up this. And this is called the wrapper. So what this shows you is some information about the sample and then the ability to manipulate it a little bit. So if I left click, we can listen to the sample, and there's the option to change things like the pitch, the volume, and the pan at the top here. I'm going to close this and go back to here. These dials at the side, we have one here for panning, so putting the kick fully to the left or fully to the right. And we have one here for volume. And if I open up the channel wrapper again by left clicking, you'll see that these dials are linked together. So they essentially just control the same thing. On any button or dial in FL Studio, left clicking will select it and right clicking will pull up sort of an options menu. You can reset it, or you can copy its value, or all sorts of stuff that's really handy. This little box here beside the sample tells us which mixer track it's going to be sent to. Now to select one, you can simply hover over this area and scroll up and down with the mouse, or you can type in a value and choose which track you want it to be sent to. So let's actually build a pattern and see how that happens. So the first thing we're going to do is to go up to this pattern thing that I mentioned earlier, and we're going to just press the plus icon, and we're going to name this pattern kick. And I'm going to click over here to just give it a color. I'm going to color it red to start off with. The next thing I'm going to do is take the kick sample over here. I'm going to right click, and I'm going to change its color to red as well, just so that it all matches up. The easiest way to create a simple drum beat is to use this step sequencer here. So this is the kick sample, and this is counting out the beats or steps in a bar. You left click to select a step, and you right click to delete it. You can also left click and drag, and right click and drag to delete. So I'm going to select one on each of these 4 beats here, so that we've got sort of 4 on the floor rhythm. And then on pattern mode, I'm just going to press play, and you'll hear that this will loop round in this pattern. If I click up here to view the mixer, you'll also see that the audio is being sent to insert 1. And then to the master. Inside the channel rack, we have a few more options to manipulate this pattern. We can open this graph editor here, and you can see that we can choose the note of the kick. So we can pitch the kick up, or we can pitch the kick down. We can also change the velocity, so how hard the kick hits, so we can make it softer and then louder again. And you have control over all sorts of parameters like pitch and the panning from within here as well. I'm just going to close the graph editor by pressing this button. Now that we've created this pattern, the next thing to do would be to arrange it onto the playlist. So if I press this button up here to view the playlist, and then I'm also going to close the channel rack. This playlist is where we're going to arrange our song. And if you look up at the top left, there's some tools. So you have a draw tool, a paint tool, a delete tool, mute, slice. These tools are going to help you manipulate the patterns in the audio on the playlist. So the first thing I'm going to do is just left click to draw in that kick sample, and you can just keep repeating it, or you could change to the brush tool and paint it across like that. On the draw and paint tools, left clicking will add and right clicking will take away. So you can either right click, or you can right click and drag to remove everything. And just like with anything on Windows, if you press Ctrl Z, it will undo what you've just done. Unlike other DAWs, you don't actually need to keep your kick or your pattern all on the same track. You can actually just put them absolutely wherever you want to, but it's good organization to just keep one sound to one track. And because of this, I'm going to go over to the track over here, and I'm going to rename and give it a color, just to match the kick. So that's one very simple pattern, but we definitely don't have a song yet. So the next thing I'm going to do is go back to the channel rack by pressing this button up here, and I'm going to add a snare and a hi-hat to this. I'm going to create a new pattern, and I'm just going to call it drums, because this is going to have both the snare and the hi-hat together, because you can add both into the same pattern. So I'm just going to quickly recolor the hi-hat and recolor the snare. And then I'm going to add a snare on these beats, and I'm going to fill each 2 steps with the hi-hat so that I've got the hi-hat on all of these counts here. Now that I have this pattern, I'm going to go back to the playlist, and I'm just going to draw it straight in, starting from the second bar. This is where the song and pattern button are going to come into play, because if I stay on the pattern button and press play, all you will hear is the hat and the snare. just like that. But if I press the song button, it takes us back to the playlist and we get to hear everything together. So it's going to be 4 kicks and then all the drums are going to join in. So it's pretty boring, but you can see the basics of arranging. And again, if I just click here, go rename, I'm just going to call that drums and give it a color. Another thing you can do is group stuff on the playlist. So you can right click and group with the above track, or you can right click and press G and it will keep grouping tracks together. Then if you go to the top one, you can right click and select auto color the group so that it all stays nice and neat and tidy and organized. It's really good to stay organized with your projects, especially when they get big and complicated. It's just best to know what's going on so that you have complete creative freedom to try whatever you want. Looking back at the channel rack, you can see how it's easy to sort of paint in drums, but this didn't really cover that piano roll that we talked about earlier. So what I wanted to show was that on each of these samples, if I right click and select piano roll, it's going to open up the piano roll that we talked about earlier. This gives us really detailed information about the MIDI information in the pattern. MIDI is just these notes on this virtual keyboard that's controlling the sample or the virtual instrument. We can repitch these hi-hats. We can adjust the very, very fine timing of everything. You can zoom in any of the panels by just going to the top and scrolling in. You can adjust them off the grid. You can also add in extra samples that you wouldn't be able to add in just by using the channel rack. You can also control down here the velocity, the panning, the fine pitch and all of that stuff. So if you wanted to, you could do stuff like pitching down the hi-hats at the end of the phrase. Let's see what that sounds like. Stuff like that might make it a bit more interesting, but let's just keep it simple for now. I'm going to now use a virtual instrument to show how an instrument pattern can be made. So I'm going to click down here and I'm going to choose GMS, which is just a synth inside FL Studio. And with this, if I make a new pattern by clicking up here and calling it bass, if I just select these notes, press play, it's only going to give me the middle C note, which is no good if I want to program a bass line. So what I do instead is I go to the piano roll and you can pick whichever notes you want, and then you can lengthen these notes. You can arrange them however you like. You can cut them up, slice them. The piano roll in FL Studio is amazing. It's incredibly easy to use and intuitive, but it's just important to know that the information in the piano roll is going to be stored in that pattern, and then you can just put that pattern straight onto the playlist to have it included in your song. When loading new instruments, it's good to get into a habit of renaming them and recoloring them as you go so that it never becomes like overwhelming or too complicated. And as you do this, make sure that you're sending it to a new mixer track as well. It's probably time to start talking about the mixer. So you pull up the mixer by pressing this button up here or by pressing F9. And again, I'm just going to click down here and select detached. The mixer is where you're going to get into the sort of sound design and really interesting stuff behind your song. The sounds in these patterns are going to be sent to the mixer, and then from the mixer you can affect them. So you can add EQ, compression, delays, reverbs, and all sorts of artistic effects. So looking at an individual insert, I'm going to choose insert 4, just for example. This is where the snare is sent. So the first thing is this dial at the top. This is the panning. So this is going to send things left or right. So if I play everything together, you'll notice that the snare panning changes. You've got the volume on the fader. There are some options down here for polarity and swapping the left and right channels, and you have a stereo separation dial so that you can make things sound a bit wider or a bit thinner. On each insert, you also have an effects chain here. So for instance, in slot 1, I can load up an equalizer. In slot 2, I can load up a reverb, and then you can start really manipulating your sounds. In this case, it's going to be EQing and adding a bit of reverb to a snare. The signal comes from the sample or the instrument into the insert, then it goes through all the effects slots and then through the sort of effects on here like the panning and the volume before each of the tracks is sent to the master, and then the master channel combines them all together. Just like everything else in FL Studio, if you right click on one of these inserts, you can rename it, and you can also give it a color. to stay super organized, and there's all the basic and advanced functions that you'd expect a mixer to have. I have other videos detailing lots of specifics about the mixer and all the different side chaining and routing options available to you, but I don't want to complicate this video. The reason you want to separate each sound onto a different mixer channel is because the snare's reverb, you're not going to necessarily want that on the kick drum or the clap or the hi-hat, and you're not going to want it on your bass, so you want to make sure that each sound goes to a new place on the mixer so that you can have a fresh set of effects for it, set the volume right, and really get into the mixing and mastering of your beat or your song. Going back to the channel rack and the playlist, as you start adding more patterns in, you'll notice that this pattern picker at the side starts filling up with different patterns, so you can select your patterns really quickly here, modify them in the channel rack, or select them here and then drag them into your playlist. The last thing that I want to talk about is how to export or save your song. So if you go back to the file menu up at the top, you can save your song pretty simply. You just click Save As and then select a folder or a location in your computer. And then to export your song, you can go to the export here, select WAV file or MP3, and then once you've chosen a location for it, it will bring up this box here. Now, to get the absolute right settings, I've linked a video in the description where I explain in detail what all of these are, but this is the process you go through to export your song, and then you just press start and it will export the song for you. Just going through a really simple overview of everything we've talked about. FL Studio is split into some pretty important windows. We have the browser again, where all of your samples and all of FL Studio's samples and instruments are stored. You can drag these straight onto the playlist or drag them into the channel rack. The channel rack is going to have all of your audio, all of your automation, all of your MIDI information stored for your patterns. Then the patterns are going to be arranged on the playlist to create your song, and then all the while the actual audio is going to be sent through the mixer, where you can use various effects and plugins to manipulate the sounds and create the sort of sounds you want. And really the best way to get used to it is to spend time and keep being open to new suggestions, new ideas, learn a few shortcut keys here and there, and just make sure that you're feeling really comfortable and secure inside the software so that you just feel like you are in control of it. I have loads more videos, which I'll leave in the description, showing different workflow tips and project templates to get you up and running and all of that stuff. So please feel free to pour through any of those videos and just grab the information that you want from them. Hopefully this video has helped you get started in FL Studio, but if you do have any questions or comments, please just leave them in the comment section down below, and I'd love to help you out and get you up and running with this software so that you can make music just the way that you want to. Thank you very much for watching, and hopefully I'll see you in the next video. Bye for now.
It's never gonna last forever. We'll always find a way to end.